afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar today. The webinar will start in a couple of minutes. Before we get started, we'll just run through some quick housekeeping and a couple of tips and tricks. Could somebody type into the chat box just to confirm that the sound is coming through nice and clear? Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. Some tips before we get started for the webinar. If you do experience any difficulties with the sound, we recommend that you try closing background applications. So don't have anything running in the background, and that will just help improve the sound for you. We also recommend that you don't change the layout of the webinar room. So don't try to maximize or minimize anything. It can occasionally kick you out of the webinar and then you have to log back in again. So just don't touch any buttons. That's our recommendation. And then, as so many of you have already discovered, we have the chat box, which is the place to type into if you do experience any issues. Let us know if you're having any trouble and we will message you directly with some troubleshooting. And the chat box is also the place where you can ask some questions. So if throughout presentation you think of some questions, type them in, and then at various points throughout presentation the questions will be addressed. And then finally, our last bit of housekeeping is we will have an exit survey at the end of the webinar. Just stay on, don't exit out of the browser. The survey will pop up automatically. It's only 4 questions and it would be fabulous if you could provide some feedback in that survey. And so without any further ado, we'll get the webinar underway.
Fantastic, thank you. So welcome everyone. My name's Kate Coffey. I work in the Friendship Grants Unit in DFAT, and I'll just take a moment just to introduce to you the people within the room. So with us today we've got Megan Anderson, who is the Assistant Secretary of the NGOs and Volunteers branch. We've also, hello everyone. We've got Gus Overall, also from the Friendship Grants Unit.
Hello folks.
We've got Matthew Fair and Lindy Judge from the Fraud Control and Aid Risk Management branch.
Hello. Good afternoon.
We will also have throughout the webinar a representative from ACFID, so that's the Australian Council for International Development, Emily Morton, who will talk to you about the ACFID Code of Conduct. So we also want to thank ACFID today for hosting the webinar on our behalf. We will be recording the webinar, so just so everyone's aware of that, and we'll make it available in the next week, and we'll send you a link to it when it's up and running. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Megan to start off the presentation.
Good afternoon. As Kate said, my name is Megan Anderson. I am the Assistant Secretary for NGOs and Volunteers branch within the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And my role really with that branch is I guess to oversee and to maintain the whole suite of community engagement programs that we have with community organisations, Australian NGOs, individual Australians who volunteer with the Australian Aid program, and relationships overseas with communities as well. I'm extremely excited to be here at this session. Really, from my perspective, a group of organisations who have operated for many years, some with some relationships with the Australian government, for many of you not before, and an opportunity for us to hear from you, learn from you, and to share with you, I guess, the way that we maintain that integrity of the Australian Aid program, and to share with you our own experience, and hopefully that helps you to build your programs overseas as well and understand how they fit into the broader Australian Aid program. I'm conscious that a couple of you have some issues with sound, so our technical people are going to look at that right now. Firstly, may I say congratulations. It's been a really competitive process in our first ever round of Australian Aid Friendship Grants, and a process that's allowed my team and myself to get out and meet many of you around the country in hearing from you about what works, what's missing in the Australian Aid program and what we could do better. One of those things was grants program. that could reach in and support your work and understand more what you're doing and how it links to the work of the Australian Aid program. In doing so, we've worked closely with the government, closely with state and territory officers of the Department of Foreign Affairs, who some of you are familiar with, and closely with governments in the region and our own posts in the region. I'm conscious that we have postponed our face-to-face briefing until in the new year, and part of the rationale for that was a chance to talk to you firstly about some of these aspects of safeguarding, and also to give everyone a bit of an opportunity to come back together in the new year and meet others in the Friendship Grants group. And I look forward to meeting you, some of you, in that process. Okay. In kicking off, I wanted to give you a little bit of an opportunity as well to know a bit more about the Australian Aid program and how it fits into Australia's foreign policy objective. So I guess you'll all know that many of us are working in a whole range of countries overseas, and Australian Aid Friendship Grants actually extends to all the countries in the Indo-Pacific, with the caveat that we've decided in this particular program not to go to reconsider your need or do not travel locations for a whole range of safety reasons. We do work in a lot of those places more broadly through our Australian Aid program and through our Australian foreign policy and trade relationships. But in this particular program, we've decided not to work in those locations. To talk a little bit more now about where the Australian Aid program fits in that relationship as well, and that Australian Aid Friendship Grants are really an opportunity for us to extend our people-to-people linkages, really important in the way Australia understands our region, but also in the way that other people understand who we are as Australians and what we think about the region. Fundamentally, as Australians, and it makes sense for us to have a safe and prosperous region, it makes sense for us to have a stable region. And over many years, in many ways, the Department of Foreign Affairs and by extension through the Australian Aid program have really been able to showcase what it is to be Australian and to learn more about our region to support that safety and stability and prosperity. And it's really a pleasure for us to be welcoming in a whole range of people from Australian Aid Friendship Grants from across Australia to be a part of that learning and sharing, and to be a part of sharing with others in a whole different range of ways, not only to help them in tough times, but also to know that we're here for the long haul and that Australia isn't a fair weather friend, if you like, that we stick it out and we care about our neighbours and friends. We are, of course, conscious, and you will be too from your own interactions and engagements overseas, that a lot of the work that we do across our region does mean that sometimes we come into contact with really difficult operating environments. It might be that the politics is different to what it is at home. Sometimes it is unstable, and as I said, sometimes that includes active conflict. While we aren't planning to go to conflict zones in the Australian Aid Friendship Grants, we do want to touch on the fact that a lot of the work that we do is in really challenging environments, and the purpose of today is really to share with you what we have learned over many years and what we believe helps to maintain the integrity and very high respect that others have for Australian aid operating around our region. Conscious, of course, that in a lot of places that you'll be working and have had relationships for many years, that infrastructure and services are patchy at best in some contexts, that there may be, hopefully unbeknownst to yourselves, terrorist or other criminal activities in groups, and some of those can target charity groups. We know that because, colleagues across the Australian government do monitor and check those kinds of things. And we just want to touch on some of those things in this presentation as well and talk to you about ways to mitigate some of those risks. We're conscious that in many countries that you'll be working that there could be, gaps in financial systems. There could be expectations on you around how you manage your finances, and obviously by extension in the grant arrangement how you manage our finances. We are of course also conscious of different cultures and practices and different employment rules, and where we can, we look forward to supporting you to navigate some of those challenges in your programs. We're very conscious that as part of our arrangements for Australian Aid Friendship Grants, we are working with people and with organisations who've had relationships for many years. So it's not our intention to, just to disregard that. It's absolutely our intention to share with you today some of the ways that we have learned over the years to protect ourselves against risks of these kinds. I did also just, want to, before we get into the deeper side, talk a little bit more about what the Australian Aid Program, does and how this program particularly fits into that. Some of you may be aware that across the Australian Aid Program, we spend about $4 billion a year across countries in the Indo-Pacific region and more broadly beyond that region. And we work a lot in education and health. Australia is well known for our international education expertise. We sit alongside governments in a whole range of countries and help them. We learn from them, but we also help them to share our own expertise and knowledge. In the health area, in particular, our international health work, including on diseases like Zika, like dengue fever and malaria, is world class. And we have, therefore, both at the community level, where we talk to people about safe hand washing, where we help build toilets, where we engage with governments about the kind of services that make sense for protecting their own people with their own money. We also influence and engage in international contexts, whether it's the United Nations or international groups that are looking at issues like malaria control or tuberculosis control, HIV/AIDS. So across the Australian Aid Program, we try wherever we can to be influencing and helping to support the alleviation of poverty and helping to support a better life for people from a whole range of different points of influence. We work, and many of you will have seen our strong work in humanitarian assistance, which doesn't just start when a cyclone or an earthquake or a landslide happens. It starts with some of the work of people like yourselves at the community level, preparing for disasters, preparing resilience, making sure people have backups in place and helping to work out what they might be, helping to make sure people with a disability have a voice and don't get left behind when disaster strikes. Obviously, bringing to bear, particularly in our region, our resources like our stores up in Brisbane that help us deploy very quickly food and water and emergency services with governments in the region. And of course, it relates to getting people back on their feet after a disaster. And some of the work of you, Australian Aid Friendship Grants recipients, is also about that, helping people get back on their feet and keep on their feet, no matter what challenges might lie ahead. We work in gender equality and empowering women and girls. We're very conscious that, obviously, about 50% of the population is women and girls, but often in places where we work, women and girls' voice isn't heard as easily, and sometimes projects or activities or engagement that we might do has a disproportionate impact, either positive or negative, on women and girls. And we're always trying to learn from that and think about where we can ensure access and opportunity, because if we leave behind half of the population, we can't possibly be alleviating poverty for people in our region. We work in agriculture, fisheries and water. We talk, and some of the activities that you're doing are in food security, are in that space about people building up their own livelihoods, their own options, their own jobs for the future. Really what the Australian Aid Program is about working with governments and people in the region to make sure they can make choices that are going to grow the economy as a whole and grow the stability of our region. because obviously that makes sense for us in Australia, and it makes sense for those overseas as well. And a big part, some of you will have seen the Prime Minister making some announcements recently with regard to the Pacific. Another big part of work we do is around infrastructure. It's around connectivity. It's around making sure that we currently are in one of the most dynamic and forward-moving regions in the world, and it's about making sure that we can engage in a way that helps Australia stay there at the forefront of that and helps make sure the dynamism and opportunity in our region continues to grow. So as I say, very, very excited about this new part of our Australian Aid program. We have worked for many years with a whole range of charities and professional organisations and different groups. We have, through the Australian Volunteers program, about 1,000 Australians located in 26 countries around the world right now. And we know from their experiences that really understanding each other and having that knowledge at a personal level, at a community level, and talking about that back at home in our Australian communities really makes a difference. It makes a difference to people understanding that the aid program isn't just about propping up poor governments in poor countries. It makes a difference to learning and understanding where things go wrong, what we can do about that. And it makes a difference to sharing with others how much really small interventions or really thoughtful opportunities like the things that you're doing through Australian Aid Friendship Grants can change people's lives and their children's lives forever. So once again, I'd just really like to thank you very much for your time today. We have some more than 100 people online, so I am conscious that it might be a little bit challenging. If you are missing out on any information, please don't hesitate to call our Australian Aid Friendship Grants Unit on the hotline number. We're very happy to talk to you about any concerns you might have, including about some of the topics that we talk about today, and risk and financial systems and other aspects. I do want to note that the work that we do, and we look forward to celebrating with you the work that you do and the outcomes of that work here in Australia and overseas, is absolutely maintained and supported because of the strength of the safeguards we have in place. But we try to make things not go bad as much as we can, but it's also supported and maintained because of the very personal experience that you have and the very personal experience that you share with members of your community. So I congratulate you once again. There are around 4,000 Australian charities registered with the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission who say they work overseas. The Australian Aid program has worked with some of those for a very long time. We've worked with others, in an ad hoc relationship or a particular country context. But I'm really, really happy and pleased that this new Australian Aid Friendship Grants program offers us the opportunity to work with a whole range of organisations in different places like yourselves, and I'm absolutely looking forward to seeing the outcomes of that here in Australia, where I hope to meet a number of you, and also across our region.
Fantastic. Thanks, Megan. Thanks for providing those overarching remarks. We'll now hand over to Lindy Judge, who will talk to you a little bit more about child protection and fraud control. So over to Lindy.
Thank you very much. Hello everyone, I'm Lindy Judge. I work in DFAT's Child Protection Compliance section. The slides I'm going to take you through today are really an overview of the sorts of things that you'll need to do as a recipient of a friendship grant. In February, when you all get together, we'll go into all of the responsibilities that you'll have and that we have in much more detail. So there's just an introduction and a few comments on the sorts of things you need to do at the outset, the things you need to be thinking about now. Well, the first thing is about DFAT's child protection policy. It's a principles-based policy, and it has 5 principles: zero tolerance of child exploitation and abuse, and we reflect that in our policy where we state that we have a zero tolerance. Also assess and manage child protection risks and impacts. That's key, and that's key to the conversation we're going to have today. Sharing responsibility for child protection, and that's a responsibility between us and yourselves and any of your downstream partners. Procedural fairness, this is very important because when you do report a child protection incident or you have queries about a child protection incident, it's imperative that we practice procedural fairness for both the victim and for the alleged perpetrator. At the key to all of the things that we do look at when we're looking at child protection is a recognition of the best interests of the child. And sometimes that is not necessarily a clear pathway, especially in some countries where reporting to authorities may create an issue. I think many of you will appreciate some of those complexities. Because the first thing you need to think about is where DFAT has a policy and why children need protecting. Now, I know many of you are quite experienced in this field, so apologies if I'm actually talking about things that you're well aware of, but I know some of you, this is your first interaction with these types of things. But there's always an unequal power of relationships between children and adults. We see that in the countries that we work. We even see that here in Australia. Humanitarian situations is a key example of where the relationship between a child and an adult can be quite unequal. The child is reliant on the adult. Children need adults to survive and develop. Many people say, well, lots of street children do really well. They don't thrive and they don't develop. It's very important that children have adults to help them survive and develop. Children are also influenced by their environment, so the actions that they see in their direct environment influence the way they develop and the way they behave. And it's important that as adults and as partners working in aid, that we ensure that we protect children in these sorts of environments. The DFAT Child Protection Policy, as you would have all read, has minimum standards. There are 9 standards, and these standards are to apply to your organisations depending on some criteria such as the level of contact and the level of working with children. Here you see we have 3 requirements. They're very high level requirements in regards to the policy. Under each of those have standards, and these are the standards that I'm going to talk to. But we won't go into great detail in these. We'll save that for February, but it should give you an idea on the sorts of things you need to be looking at the moment. The first thing is that you need to have a child protection policy if you're working with children or if your organisation is child focused. But the reason we have child protection policies is it's a public face. It's how we tell our staff and the public about our commitment to child protection. It's where we tell people what we'll do if we get a report, and how we'll train people on our expectations of our staff and their behaviours. Everyone should have a reporting procedure. This, even if you're an individual or a very small organisation, having a clear notated procedure on what you do if you receive a notification is important. That's for your staff and for us. So there's a requirement under DFAT's child protection policy that you must send any notifications to childwelfare@dfat.gov.au, and that address will be further down in the slides. The reason that we need you to report is so that we can assist you in country when you're having to deal with a notification. DFAT does not investigate notifications, but it also helps us identify any trends that are occurring, not just in your program, but generally in the country that you might be working in. Training is key. Staff need to know what it is they need to do. You should consider training at induction when you take on new staff. You should have refresher training throughout the year. And if you have staff that have specific responsibilities, you should ensure that they receive the training they need to enable them to protect children in their roles. We also have a commitment to the exclusion of high-risk staff. Now, for most people, that's about recruitment, ensuring that we're not attracting the sorts of people who we don't want to work with children. We often do that through our advertisements for positions, where you might state that you will not knowingly employ someone who is a risk to children, and that's either directly or indirectly. You might also have notices up in your offices that might say that you're a child-safe organisation and that you don't engage anyone who poses a risk to children. If you do have a policy, it's important that it's reviewed regularly. That can be an internal review where your organisation has a look at the policy, or an independent review. The DFAT's doing an independent review of our policy next year, and some of you will probably see that come past your desks in one way or another to have a look at and to comment on. And it's really important as a community that we do engage with each other on the things that are working and the things that are not working in regards to child protection. The most important part of any of this, of course, is risk assessments. The things we need to do when we first look at how we're going to manage risks to children is to assess the level of contact that we have with children. And sometimes that's quite difficult. You might have a grant where you're fixing toilets in a school. In those sorts of situations, many people believe they don't have any contact with children. It's important to note that you still need to apply some strategies around the possibility that you could. Children are always intrigued by things that are happening in their environment. If you don't fence off your work area, so when you're working in the toilets, children may enter, and that puts them at risk and puts you at risk as well. It's not just they enter, and that puts them at risk and puts you at risk as well. It's not just about dealing with children. The other thing that you might consider is whether or not you actually need to be undertaking the work in the school during school hours. You could do it during the school holidays. Can you do it after hours? And that's about looking at, how much contact you have and then what it is you need to do about that. Anything that you do in regards to risk, we'll talk about risk a bit more, you need to include in a risk log. And that's something you need to revisit on a regular basis. You'll see that at the bottom of the slide, we talk about DFAT's guidance note on establishing child protection risk context. We will look at that in greater detail in a few minutes. The basic rule of thumb, if you're looking at your level of contact with children, it fits into these three areas. So working with children, the DFAT would expect if you were working with children that you would undertake a full child protection risk assessment. You can use the DFAT's risk assessment tool, the context tool, and you can also use our guidance notes. And we have guidance notes on various subjects that will help you in that. If you work with children, DFAT expects that you will apply all of the minimum standards that we briefly touched on previously. If you have contact with children, it's about identifying the risks and applying those standards that will assist you to manage those risks. Another example of how that might occur, if you're a research organisation and you're providing research for a child-focused organisation. If you're doing that online, you might have some contact with children if the children are recipients, but you wouldn't have any contact with children if the recipients, people you're researching, are not, if they're adults or teachers that you're talking to. So you need to have a look at where it is in that three pillar you fit what it is you're doing, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Ordinarily, a research organisation who's sitting at a desk at the Australian National University will have nil contact. So the actions they undertake are nil. You might identify that you have no risks, in regards to your activity and have that noted somewhere. That's business, shows that you've assessed the risk and you've identified that there is a bidding. Doesn't mean that you don't go back and revisit that, maybe once a year when you're looking at your program. The key one for DFAT, and one that you should all consider very seriously, is employment contracts. A well-written employment contract for you and the people you're employing should advise potential employees or volunteers that there will be consequences to actions. And that includes suspension, transfer if they've breached the code of conduct, or if there's misconduct, that they may be dismissed. The difficulty in undertaking those sorts of actions when you don't have a contract in place is the employee can say, "You didn't tell me I had to do that." This gives you an avenue to take action. The other reason it's a good idea to do is if one of your staff have been arrested for a serious crime against a child, having something like this in your employment contract gives you the facility to remove them from the role that they're in, or in fact remove them from the organisation without having to wait for formal processes to conclude. Recruitment and screening, again, I touched on very briefly just before. Criminal record checks, verbal referee checks when you're talking to people. Quite often people are more likely to tell you a story about someone than they are to put it in writing. When you're interviewing people, use behavioural-based interview questions. DFAT has a guidance note specific to recruitment and screening. We'll give you ideas on the sorts of questions you can ask, the sorts of questions you might ask referees, things you want them to provide. You'll find it quite a good resource in that regard. It's important also to ask potential employees to disclose any offences. And again, that comes back to your employment contract, because if you discover that they haven't disclosed, it gives you an avenue to remove that person if you need to. The other important thing in local context is it's not necessarily easy to get a criminal record check. So in those sorts of situations, you might ask a village elder for a character reference. If you're in some countries, you wouldn't approach the authorities for a criminal record check, because that could in and of itself become an issue for the person, depending on what country you're in. I won't name countries. In those circumstances, you would go back and you would ask again for references from people around that person, people that worked for, from the community. Those sorts of things are the sorts of things that you'd include in those positions. The other really important thing is a code of conduct. You can't educate someone on what they do and don't do in the workplace in regards to the protection of children if you don't provide them a guide. The code of conduct is imperative, and I know that you've all signed a code of conduct, and you will be talking about ACFED's code of conduct. It's important that you have one of your own. It's something that you can put up in the foyer of your office to show people what the behaviours you exhibit in your organisation. It's something that all of your staff and volunteers should sign. If you're an individual or a very small organisation, you can adjust the one that you would have signed for DFAT to reflect the work that you do. And some of you have quite child-focused activities that you're doing. You need to keep in mind that DFAT's code of conduct, or the professional behaviours, as they're called in this version, are a minimum. So if you're working in a field where you might be providing respite care for vulnerable children, we would expect to see you have something a little more robust than we have as the minimum in your code of conduct or in your professional behaviours. If you have any questions about those, ACFID and DFAT can help you out with those sorts of things and some good examples of high-risk codes of conduct. And this is my favourite slide, everyone. This is the way I explain how we expect you to deal with anyone you also include in the supply chain. So what we see here at the very top is with DFAT, we've engaged you in the friendship grants. That's you, the grant recipient. You then proceed to deliver whatever it is you've been given a grant to deliver, and employ whoever it is you need to employ. What we're asking you to do is, when you create your child protection policy or have your procedures in place for how you behave, you need to make sure that anyone else you engage also does that, and that they abide by your child protection policy. So your subcontractor doesn't apply DFAT's child protection policy, they apply yours. If it's a contact with children or it's not actually any contact with children, then you would manage those risks as they come up. But it's important that you know that it's your child protection policy that your subcontractors need to apply, and then you apply ours. Once you'll see what I also have there, we always refer to your subcontractors or people who you have in your supply chain as a downstream partner. That's the language that we use in our team. It's important when you're reporting your risks and reporting notifications that that's fed up the line. So your downstream partners, or the people who are delivering at the coalface, must report those to you, and then you report those to us. And that's really important, especially around risk. That's part of what our internal audit branch look at when they go out. If DFAT's child protection compliance section come out and have a look, we'll have a look at how that's being managed. Possibly that's something that will occur through your monitoring evaluation as well. So keep in mind it needs to be there, always needs to be documented, and you have to have the process there so people can see that's what you're doing. It's the same with notifications. Once we'll accept a notification from one of your downstream partners, the first thing we'll do is we'll come to you and say that we've received a notification. But what they should be doing is reporting through their line up to you, and then you report to us. And that again is through child welfare at dfat.gov.au. I'm going to talk a little bit more about reporting. Oh, images. I'm going to talk a bit about images. We often have a lot of conversation about images and what you can and can't do. There was a guidance note on the taking of images, and it talks about best practice, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. And I've just got 4 examples here. At the top left is a boy playing soccer. From our perspective, there was consent provided for that image, and that was fine to use because we did obtain consent. DFAT's child protection policy asks you to also have informed consent. And that means that the child and the parent or guardian must understand what the image is for. That can be difficult in the remote communities. What you might find is you might need to show them a picture of what it is it's going to do. A lot of communities have mobile phones now, so it's they understand that it could be on the phone and it could be broadcasted widely. We do have a little thing in the guidance note that has diagrams of where things could be used. The other one, where the boy on the right-hand side, the boy looking at a teacher's finger, again, that also had consent. So that photo's okay as well. The important thing is there that the parent provided consent. That teacher in the room cannot provide consent for the photo. And that's about a conversation we had about power ratios. Sometimes a teacher may not have the child's best interest at heart. Maybe it's because they're receiving funding, they don't want to lose the funding. You're asking to take a photo, they're worried if you don't let them. If they say, no, you can't take a photo, then you will remove the funding. It's very important that it's the guardian and the child that do that. My latest addition to our slides is the person with the tattoo in the bottom left-hand corner. So what's that to me? This is a little story about geocoding. That's where when you take an image, it identifies the exact location when you took that photo from. This particular image was used on social media. From that innocent edition of that on social media, I think it might have even been a television program, police recognised the person by their tattoo and knew exactly where to find them because it was geocoded. This is the same problem we have with children and with vulnerable children. If your images have the geocoding, you need to remove it before you use it. Certainly file that information somewhere if it's relevant to your work, but don't leave it attached to the image. It's very important. We have had instances where children have been found by either estranged family members or others by that geocoding. The last one, the very bottom right one, some of you I know will remember this photo from many years ago. It's an old AusAid photo. This photo is not one that we would consider was appropriate. And the reason for that is it's showing a child who is not well dressed or fully covered, and it's showing them in a vulnerable position. And for that reason, it's not actually telling the story that you might want to tell in a way that you should be telling it. You don't need to have a child in that sort of position to tell the story. This would have been a humanitarian one. There could have been much better pictures that they did. And this is actually one, AusAid actually used this a very, very long time ago in a publication, and we had to pull the publication because it really was not an appropriate image. Now, we do have lots of information about images. We will send around an example of a consent form for you to have a look at. Something of interest about consent, and I know some of you already do this, and some might not be aware that DFAT accepts that you can use verbal consent. Now, the benefit of verbal consent, if you're in a remote community, language might be a barrier. Some people don't like to sign things they think are an official document. So by doing verbal consent and making a file note directly afterwards, you've actually noted that you've made the attempt, you've got consent from the relevant people, and you've filed it. We've actually had that tested legally, and that is actually covered legally. But normally when you file something like that, it's very close to the date. So in 2 years' time, if someone says, I didn't give consent for you to use my photo, you can actually go back and say, back here, I can evidence that you did, and you gave me consent back there. You can do verbal consent in some really clever ways as well. You can do it with a photo. So I consent in native language. You can even video it when you ask the question and the person actually says yes or no. So a few tips, they'll all be in that guidance notes I spoke about before about images. So there's 6 things we need you to think about for your responsibilities with the DFAT Child Protection Policy. Ensure the best interests of the child. Assess and manage risks to children. Monitoring and evaluation, and that's your own monitoring and evaluation. That's not our monitoring and evaluation. That's about the things that you do, checking your risk assessments, making sure they're still valid, making sure that your downstream partners are still aware of all of the things that they're supposed to do. Key is reporting concerns. We can't improve capacity if we don't know what's happening, so it's very important to report concerns. Of course, behave appropriately through codes of conduct, professional behaviours, whichever method you choose to take, and of course the appropriate use of images. This is just a really quick look at the assessment of child protection risk. So I'll just ask you back one. Oh, sorry, I missed the important one, which is the one you really all want to see. So far, the steps that you have already undertaken is advised if you have contact or are working with children in your application. You also signed the DFAT Child Protection Professional Behaviours. That was in your application. You've also signed the annual Vulnerable People's Declaration, and that's something that will occur at the end of your grant as well. That talks about whether or not you've undertaken the things you needed to do. That particular declaration is an Australian government-wide declaration, so some of you would have done this through other areas as well, other departments. And also signed your Friendship Grant Agreement, which will have sections in it in regards to child protection. So what is it you need to do now after I've given you all of that spiel? You need to now review the level of contact you have with children. Using that tool I keep talking about, that establishing the child protection risk context tool, it will assess a couple of things. It will assess your contact and working with children context for the activity that you're delivering, so that the actual thing you're delivering, and also for your organisation, any organisation you might be using. It's two things. One's about how we're behaving and what we're doing, and ensuring we're doing the right thing, and the other is making sure that the activity doesn't introduce risks to children. Then, of course, implementing the appropriate standards to mitigate the risks you've identified. Now, for those of you who are a small organisation, don't panic about creating a child protection policy. If you read DFAT's child protection policy in attachment A, it will tell you you can do a policy statement. And that's just a page identifying what you're doing about those things in your program. And DFAT's child protection compliance section and the friendship grants section can help you out with that on whether or not you should fall into that category or whether you shouldn't fall into that category. That's really about risk and the size of your organisation. Now I'll get on to the risks. So when we're looking at this, basically this is the thing that we need to do. Does the activity or organisation involve contact with children? This is your key task from the child protection perspective at the moment. Using the guidance note, establishing child protection risk context. If it comes out as a yes, that you do have contact, then you need to do a risk assessment and determine what it is you need to do. If you're identified as working with children, you need to apply all of those 9 standards that I've spoken about. If you're in contact with children, then you need to apply the appropriate standards to mitigate the risks. So in some of those situations, it might be an online risk that you need to mitigate. It might be people travelling and working by themselves in an environment where you'll have contact with children in the task, doing those sorts of things. So identifying exactly what the risk is, and then what it is you're going to do about it. I think there's going to be a pack come out. I'm going to send you a list of potential situations where you're going to assess the risk, the context, and then what you might do about it in the mitigation strategies. And I think a few of them I will touch on the sorts of activities that you're delivering. So when that comes out, have a read. If you have any questions about it, certainly get in touch with us. We're at childprotection@dfat.gov.au. Again, that'll be later. But we can help you out with that part. As you can see on the diagram, if your response is no, you don't have no contact, you monitor for change, and then apply any standards that you think you would like to apply. There's nothing wrong with being best practice when you're doing these things. We have many organisations who have absolutely no contact with children who have child protection policies. Because it examples their commitment as an organisation generally. These are the list of the guidance notes that we do have. As you can see, we have recruitment screening, criminal record checks that will give you some good ideas on what to do in the country when you can't actually obtain a criminal record check. There was some industry-focused things as well. Health, education, humanitarian, extractive industries, infrastructure. Some of the worst child protection notifications we have are in the infrastructure field. So If you're doing something with infrastructure, have a read of that. That'll give you an idea on what sorts of things we come across in the department around infrastructure projects. The next, so we're skipping to, the next thing I'm going to talk about is preventing sexual exploitation and abuse. Many of you would have heard in the news over the last year or so, there's been a lot of work internationally in regards to preventing sexual exploitation and abuse. The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has been heavily involved in international side, what's happening here internally. We are about to start the process of having our own preventing sexual exploitation and abuse policy. That will be going out for consultation early in the new year, if not next week. So some of you may or may not be chosen at random to have a look or discuss. I think it's actually going to come up onto our webpage as well. So if you look at DFAT's web, you can have a look at the discussion paper and you can make any comments that you would like to make in regards to that. We're expecting it, we're hoping April, so we're saying the first half of 2019, the policy will be in place. Of course, once that policy is in place, that will apply to anyone who is funded by DFAT. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about today is fraud control. Actually, I'm not going to talk to you much about it at all because we have a nice video which will give you a little bit of relief from listening to me talk. But the important things around fraud control is to make sure that your staff know their responsibilities and have funds that are to be spent. It's about your education, your training. You need to make sure that the documentation that you have accounts for all the funds that you've been given. The documentation that you have accounts for all the funds that you've been given. So that needs to include anything that you've spent your grant money on needs to actually have a corresponding receipt or some way of evidencing how you've gone about spending that money. You also need to make sure that you know who you're contracting with and have checks in place to ensure their funds are spent properly. You need to ensure that any occurrences of fraud or corruption, suspected or otherwise, are reported to DFAT. You also need to use the fraud control toolkit when you're having a look at that, because that will help you understand your responsibilities and give you guidance on the steps you need to take. We're just about to go to a video which I hope will assist. it appears some people have problems seeing that video. I do apologise. We will send it out to everyone in a link. It's actually at the bottom of this page as well, and I do believe we're sending the slides out for everyone to have a look at, so you'll be able to find it there. This is a basic refresher on the resources that I've referred to throughout my talk. The child protection ones are there. We have a direct link on the DFAT website, www.dfat.gov.au/child protection. All of our resources are there. Also, for policy creation guidance, if you're needing some help and you're looking for a product that will help you out step by step, please go and have a look at the ACFID guidelines for development of a child protection policy. If you have any questions, though, as you're proceeding through that, don't hesitate to contact us. Remember, reporting concerns, go to childwelfare@dfat.gov.au. In regards to vulnerable people in preventing sexual exploitation and abuse, anything that we're going to report about a person who is not a DFAT staff member, that goes to vulnerablepeople@dfat.gov.au, and anything concerning a DFAT staff member goes to conduct@dfat.gov.au. Remember, when you're reporting any of these things, you don't have to have evidence. If you have a concern, please report the concern as well. And of course, Ford have a toolkit on the DFAT website as well, and that's there. The address is there. It's just under our publications on the DFAT website. Thank you for your time. As it was a really brief introduction to what you need to do. The one thing, if you only remember one thing, assess your risks, do the risk context tool, and see whether or not you need to have a child protection policy. We're here to help.
So we'll now hand over to Matthew. Thanks, Lindy. So Matthew will be talking about managing terrorism financing risk in your activities.
Okay, good afternoon. Matthew Fair from the Aid Risk and Fraud Control Branch. Just wanted to go through about half a dozen slides this afternoon in relation to managing the risk of terrorism financing. I think we're all very aware of the rising global terrorism. We see it now in our daily lives. There are a number of associated risks, including that legitimate public or private funding is diverted to support terrorist purposes. And there are a number of ways that terrorists can attempt to divert funds, including by fraud, as Lindy just talked about, posing as legitimate suppliers or a legitimate company, NGO, or by infiltrating legitimate enterprises. DFAT, and Megan was saying this before, DFAT takes the risk of terrorism financing extremely seriously across its global work, including the Australian Aid program. Strong management of the risks of financing terrorism protects your organisations, protects DFAT, and it protects the reputation of the Australian Aid program and gives us, I guess, the ability to keep operating in the very difficult environments where we do operate. DFAT's, in general, DFAT's agreements require various partners and suppliers to manage the risk of terrorism financing. I just wanted to talk briefly this afternoon about some of the provisions that are in the agreements that you've already signed. The first one is that we require that you not enter into a contract with a person or an entity that is listed on either of two lists. The first one being the Australian government's listed terrorist organisations, and if you type in Google or something like that, listed terrorist organisations, will bring you up the link to go there. And that's about, I think at the minute, maybe 26 organisations are currently listed as terrorist organisations under the Criminal Code. The second list is what we call DFAT's consolidated list of all persons and entities who are subject to targeted financial sanctions or travel bans under Australian sanctions law. You can find this list through DFAT's website, and it is quite a longer list compared to the previous list. But there is something there called link match software, which allows you to basically type in the name of the person or the organisation that you're interested in, and that matches potentially against individuals and entities on that list. So that's a very useful piece of software. You can also subscribe to receive updates to the list. We ask that in the event that you discover you've entered into a contract with a person or an entity that's on either of these lists, that you contact DFAT, and if directed by DFAT, terminate such a contract. The other clauses that are in the agreements you've signed, basically asking that you use best endeavours to ensure that individuals or organisations involved in implementing the activity are not linked to individuals or organisations associated with terrorism, and secondly, that the grant is not used to provide direct or indirect support or resources to organisations or individuals associated with terrorism. So as I say, they're some of the key clauses in the Friendship Grant Agreement. And I guess the question comes, what does best endeavours entail? And this is where I, again, pick up on the point Lindy was making before about the importance of risk assessment and assessing the risk. What is the level of risk of diversion of funds to terrorists in the program that you are implementing? And then secondly, what proportional controls do you need in place to manage that risk? So it might be, for example, really depends upon the nature of what you're doing, where you're doing it, and so forth. But it might be that you're operating in Indonesia, the Philippines, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, some of those countries which are known to be higher risk locations in terms of terrorist activities. In those cases, you might say, okay, well as checking against those lists that we went through previously, we might do some open source research to see what we can find out about the organisation or the individual we're going to be working with, and whether that's good old Google searches, Facebook searches, you name it. It's amazing what you can find when you use some of these things. It may be that you're operating in a lower risk context. So it might be that you're doing something in the Pacific, and it might be that your organisation is actually providing all of the resources. You're sending out the people to do the training or provide the equipment or whatever it is. So you're not actually going to be engaging with suppliers. There's not going to be that same level of risk. In that instance, you might say, okay, I don't need to do any more than basic check of those two lists that we went through previously. So it really depends upon, as I say, the nature of what you're doing and where you're doing it. So the importance of your risk assessment. Thankfully, there are some very useful resources to help you manage these obligations. One is produced by the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission, and essentially this is a useful publication that articulates various governance measures to help protect you against the risk of being misused for terrorism financing. It's a very good publication. We encourage people to have a look at that one if you haven't seen that previously. The second one, the Department of Home Affairs has a fairly simple fact sheet, again, about safeguarding your organisation against the risk of terrorism financing. I guess what I would say is that we know many of your organisations will already have internal controls in place to promote accountability and transparency in your financial operations. We know that many of the not-for-profit organisations that we work with have already implemented specific measures to reduce the risk of terrorism financing. I guess what we're suggesting is you may like to use these resources that we've listed here to review what you're already doing to identify opportunities to strengthen controls and practices. The last thing to say is in relation to reporting. Your Friendship Grant Agreement requires that all concerns and suspicions related to the diversion of DFAT funds to terrorists should be reported. There's a couple of different options that we've listed there, whether it's the National Security Hotline or emailing either of DFAT's sanctions section or the transnational crime section. That is an extremely quick overview of managing the risk of terrorism financing. As I guess my key message would be risk assessment and putting in place measures to manage the risk that you've identified proportionate to where you're operating, what the program involves, and so forth. But we can happily talk more about any of that either at the briefing in February, or I think we've got an opportunity for questions now.
Fantastic. So thanks, Lindy and Matthew. So we are conscious that that's a lot of information for you in a very short amount of time, but there is an opportunity to ask some questions now. We might start, there was one question earlier in relation to a standardised form for permission to photograph. So Lindy, would you mind just answering that in that regard?
Thank you, Kate. DFAT does have some examples of permission forms that you can use. They're actually not published, so that would be something that I would have to send to you. Other organisations have very good examples. I think ACFID have one that you could certainly make use of. Many other organisations do. Childwise have a really good one that you could look at as well. But we can include an example. Ours is a bit lengthy because it covers a great deal of stuff. So you'd probably look at ours and go, maybe not. You might use a simpler one.
So just in relation to resources as well, we will send out an email following the webinar with links to a lot of these resources that will help you rather than trying to kind of search through some of this information now. I can say that there's a question in relation to the briefing about flying in on the 6th, the morning of the 6th, and out on the evening of the 7th. In that regard, those 2 days, we will cover this a little bit later, but those 2 days will be full days. We anticipate we'll start around 8:30 and go through to about 5:30, but that should allow most to fly in, hopefully, on the morning of the 6th and out on the evening of the 7th. So we can see people are still typing, so we'll just... So any special guidance around South Sudan? Are you referring to terrorism financing or child protection, or is there a specific area that you're referring to there? Michael?
I might just jump in. We don't have anything in the child protection compliance section. It's something that we do.
And just on that, it might also be worth saying it, touching base with if you're operating in South Sudan, conscious that our DFAT desk, so that would be the South Sudan bilateral desk, will be able to help. And if you want to make some of those connections, we'd be happy to make some contacts. So if you email friendshipgrants@dfat.gov.au, we can make the connections or the linkages there.
I can see a couple of questions there. In regards to partnering organisations, if you've done a risk, each organisation needs to do a risk assessment to determine what it is you need to do. So even if you're using a downstream partner, they need to do that as well. I hope that answers that. Attachment A of the Child Protection Policy will give you some guidance on that as well. In regards to accounting for spending of monies, where there are no receipts, as in payment to locals, make a file note that that's been spent and save it somewhere where you can attach it to the information in regards to the grant.
Sorry, Ian, we might actually get you to email that question specifically to the Friendship Grants inbox, and we can follow up. GST is in Australia, the fund, so we're providing them in Australia, but we can follow up with our accounts team. Okay, and so just conscious that there was just one comment earlier around one of the diagrams in the slides about the white writing was a bit difficult to see. So we will be sending out the slides, but we'll make sure to make a special mention of that one being in black writing as well. So hopefully that will make it very clear to everyone and that was in relation to the relationship with your in-country partners or implementing partners, downstream partners.
Thanks for that. I'll certainly note that and make some adjustments. Good feedback. Okay, so if you haven't got any further questions for Lindy or Matthew, we might move along. I'll just give you a moment. Oh, there's one more. So the training in February and what will that cover? We will come to that. So just hold on that. We'll come back to that in a little while. So there'll be a chance for questions. We'll go through some next steps and things, and hopefully that'll give you a bit more information. Okay, fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Matthew. And as they said, we're all here to help. We're not making this too daunting, we hope, but conscious we need to outline the expectations that DFAT has in relation to your grant agreement on this, and so please get in touch anytime. So we will now move on to talking about the ACFID Code of Conduct. So here with us now we have Emily Morton, who's a Standards and Codes Advisor, who will provide a brief overview of the ACFID Code of Conduct. But as I said before, ACFID is the Australian Council for International Development. They are the peak body representing NGOs in the international development space. And they do administer the code, which it aims to improve the outcomes of international development and increase stakeholder trust by enhancing the transparency and accountability. So without further ado, over to Emily.
Thanks, Kate. Hi, everyone. Great to see so many people here and have this opportunity to talk to you about ACFID and about our Code of Conduct. So I work here in the Standards and Code team along with two other people, my colleagues. And my hope here is just to give you a really brief overview of ACFID and in particular the Code of Conduct. And I also want to direct you to some of our free resources and learning opportunities that are available to everyone, not just to our members. But I do know that there are many ACFID members participating today, so I'm going to keep this fairly brief. If anyone has any questions or wants to follow anything up related to the Code of Conduct or ACFID or getting in touch with us, then there'll be some contact details as part of these slides, so you can do that later. So as Kate said, just a really brief overview of ACFID for those of you who might be fairly new to this or haven't come across us recently. We're a membership organisation. So we are the peak body working for NGOs in the international development and humanitarian response sector. So at the moment we have 121 full members and they're a really diverse and fantastic range of NGOs, both in terms of their size, where they work, and the focus of their work. We also have 23 affiliate members, so most of those are universities, but also other organisations who support the vision of ACFID. So as well as our members, we work really closely with our partners. So we have a really strong relationship with DFAT and work together on a range of policy issues, including, I think, many of the safeguarding issues that you've been looking at today. Some of our other partners are ACMC, the Australian Civil Military Centre, and the RDI network. So I guess one of the main things that we do is we aim to sort of facilitate collaboration and communication across the sector, both within our members, but also more generally as well, including with government and other interested parties. So this includes supporting our members through communities of practice. We have learning events, disseminating research and sharing resources. And a lot of those are available for everyone, as well as for our members. And of course, ACFID has a really important role in setting the good practice standards for the sector. And this is mainly done through the Code of Conduct. So the code, it's a voluntary and self-regulatory code of good practice. The purpose of it is to enhance transparency, accountability, and obviously the effectiveness of our members. And so in doing this, aiming to improve the outcomes and trust in the development and humanitarian sector. So to be a member of ACFID, organisations have to adhere to the principles and obligations of the code. And there's quite, as those of you who are members will know, there's quite a rigorous reporting process that you go through on an annual basis. And this aims to increase that trust in the code and being a member. So as a signatory to the code, you're demonstrating your commitment to good practice across all areas of your work. And I know that organisations that are looking for funding, say through the Australia NGO Cooperation Program, need to be members of ACFID as well. So we'll just take a quick look at the code in a bit more detail. The code was revised last year, and it now consists of 9 overarching high quality principles. So these principles cover how your organisation might approach your work. It also covers the types of processes that are involved, things like MEL or working in partnership, your communications, and it also looks at the big picture organisational systems and structures that help you to operate effectively. Things around your governance, how you manage your resources, procurement, and your general culture and human resources, etc. So it's really quite comprehensive. It covers most or if not all aspects of an organisation's work, and it delves down into quite a lot of detail. So I'm not going to go into the actual detail of the code right now. You can have a look at that on our website in your own time, but I just wanted to show you an example of how the higher level quality principles are broken down into some more explicit commitments. So this is one around the safeguarding of children, which I know you've talked about a lot today already, but we work very closely with DFAT to align our guidance and also our expectations and requirements. And you can see that this commitment then is broken down into these indicators. So these are around having a commitment to safeguarding of children, what needs to be in the Code of Conduct, and things related to reporting procedures. And within these, there are actually even more detail that go into exactly what we would expect to be included in a policy and that sort of thing. This is how the code operates for all of the commitments. So for ones around resource management, you might then go into and look at things like procurement, look at also financial risk and wrongdoing, and there's quite a lot of detail there, as I've said. So the code itself is really explicit. I'd encourage you, if you haven't had a look at it before, to go and have a play, maybe have a look at just one of the principles or a particular area that you're trying to strengthen your organisation in. And it might be, you might find it quite a useful self-assessment tool just to go in and have a look at the exact verifiers or things that ACFID is looking for organisations to have to demonstrate their good practice in these areas. So the last thing that I just wanted to do was to draw your attention to some of the resources that ACFID makes available for anyone who's interested, not just our members, and I know that some of these might have been mentioned before. So the main one is the Good Practice Toolkit, and I've just got a few screenshots here from it. So it's an online supplement to the code. So it does take the code and then it provides some practical advice and support to help your organisation actually implement the code, or it explains in a bit more detail what we might mean by certain things. So again, it's really comprehensive, and I'd encourage you to start by just looking at perhaps one of the particular areas that you're interested in. Quite recently, we've updated our child safeguarding guidance, and there's also been a new financial wrongdoing toolkit that's been put out. So some of those issues that you guys were talking about before, you might want to go and have a look at that in there as well. So within the toolkit, there's actually a bank of resources that are specific to each section of the code, each of the commitments. So these include things such as actual examples of policies, case studies, reports, and even links to relevant legislation and that sort of thing. And I know DFAT has a lot of resources as well, and where we can, we overlap and share those in this space. So if you are interested in learning a bit more about the code and how your organisation might be able to use it, there's a free e-learning module that takes around half an hour, and this is available through the Learn with ACFID website. And I understand these slides will be shared with you later. You can follow up with these links. And for those of you who are wanting to keep up to date with what's happening in the development sector more broadly, ACFID puts out a regular sector news email, and you can sign up to this on our website as well. And lastly, if you haven't already, take a look at ACFID's website. They have a whole bank of resources covering all sorts of issues. We share different reports. You can see a couple of the most recent ones here, Humanitarian Accountability Report. We put out practice papers that ACFID has developed. We share our members' work, and just where possible try and provide a place for all of the resources to be kept together. So if there are particular topics, again, that you're interested in, you can go in and search and find a variety of resources alongside the Good Practice Toolkit as well. All right, so hopefully that's given you a bit of a very brief overview of ACFID and the Code of Conduct. If you do have any questions about the code, or you want some help finding resources, or you want to know more about ACFID and its membership, please feel free to get in touch with us. We're more than happy to answer questions from anyone. And yeah, good luck with everything, and all the best. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Emily. So as Emily said, there are links and things throughout the presentation. We will be providing the slides to you following the presentation, but also following up with some key links, which we will try and ensure that they are all sent as part of the email as well. And if you do have any questions, code@acfid.asn.au is your main contact point in relation to the code. And if you struggle to remember that one, you can email Friendship Grants and we'll refer it on. Fantastic. Thanks, Emily. And I do note that there were some further questions around the age of a child, and particularly special guidelines regarding reporting images of children with disabilities. I will flag here that Lindy and Matthew have had to depart, so we will ensure that we get the correct definitions back to you through the email that follows this webinar as well. So we'll now move on to talking about some of the DFAT priorities, and specifically here we're going to start with inclusive development. So inclusive development consists of ensuring that all marginalised and excluded groups are stakeholders and are included in development processes and implementation. So we know from our experience that including the poorest people make the development outcomes more effective. All marginalised groups must be included for these outcomes to be met effectively. As you will know, people have all different needs, and if we don't ask the right questions or involve the right people in the design and implementation of activities, we may inadvertently leave them out, exclude them, or groups, and they have then become effectively hidden. So we want to reiterate here the importance of considering these particular issues of gender, disability, and Indigenous peoples and ethnic minorities in the design and implementation of your activities. So we'll go through those in a little bit more detail shortly, but of course we will be touching on these a lot more in the Friendship Grants briefing in February. And of course we note that many of your activities are already focusing on these issues, so it's just giving you a bit of a DFAT or the aid program's view on some of them. So if we start with gender equality, I'm sure you're all aware that gender equality is about the equal opportunities, rights and responsibilities for women and men, girls and boys. So it doesn't mean here that women and men are the same. So DFAT's gender equality and women's empowerment strategy applies across all work undertaken by DFAT, and it's under 3 pillars: enhancing women's voice in decision-making, leadership and peace building, promoting women's economic empowerment, and ending violence against women and girls. DFAT does require that you incorporate these measures to address gender inequality and women's empowerment in your design and implementation, and also in your monitoring and evaluation of your activities. Again, light touch on here, but we will explore this much further, and we do ask that you go and have a look at some of these policies, which we'll be providing the link following the webinar. Similarly with disability, it's a priority issue for the aid program. People with a disability are often the most vulnerable and excluded members in developing countries. A quick stat for you, there are approximately 1 in 7 people globally that have a disability, so that's 15% or around 1 billion people, and about 80% of those people with disabilities live in developing countries. So it's quite a large stat. So for that reason, we've got Development for All 2015 to 2020 strategy that aims to promote improved quality of life for people with disabilities in developing countries. The Australian Government, of course, aims to ensure that people with a disability are included in and benefit equally from Australia's aid program, which is consistent with our obligations under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with a Disability. DFAT's definition, as you can see there, is persons with disabilities include those who have an episodic or long-term physical, mental, intellectual or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. The Australian Government's approach is outlined in this strategy, which provides more guidance on how the aid program will meet the needs and priorities of people with a disability. So again, an introduction, have a look at the policy where it will explore it further, and we'll also have the disability team coming to the briefing in February. So the Australian Government is committed to providing opportunities to assist Indigenous peoples, both in Australia and overseas, to overcome social and economic disadvantage. The DFAT Indigenous Peoples Strategy commits that all DFAT funded programs will strive to improve outcomes for Indigenous peoples and bring into account international best practice. DFAT's Reaching Indigenous Peoples in the Australian Aid Program Guidance Note assists staff and implementing partners to give effect to this strategy in the aid program. So where your activities have an impact on Indigenous people, you should consult with Indigenous peoples on decisions that affect them, provide meaningful opportunities for Indigenous peoples to participate in planning, implementing, monitoring and evaluating programs that are delivered by Indigenous communities, and of course identify and address the barriers on an ongoing basis that may prevent Indigenous peoples from accessing and equally benefiting from your activity. We look forward to going through this in a little bit more detail. So we've had a few questions that have come into the Friendship Grants inbox, so around branding and communication. As you're aware, this is one of the goals of the Friendship Grants program, is to reach out to your networks in Australia and overseas. For DFAT and the Australian Aid program, branding is a key mechanism for enhancing the visibility of Australian Government's international aid activities and initiatives. The correct branding, of course, maximises recognition of the development role played by the Australian Government and increases that accountability and transparency of the aid program. So in short, what we are recommending is using the Australian Aid identifier. So that's that picture that you can see on the slide there. Of course, more information and different backgrounds and things are included on the DFAT website. If that link doesn't work and you're wanting to get something out sooner rather than later, you can type in DFAT logos or DFAT branding and you will see it come up. It gives some very specific guidance there. We will also send a link to it following the webinar. It does give you also some suggested content, so wording you might like to use. It's not necessary to get approval from the Friendship Grants team to post a tweet or something on Facebook or in your e-newsletter. We are recommending that you do use it is a contractual requirement to use the branding, the Australian Aid identifier. And that's not just in your social media, that's also in publications in country or where you're putting anything out in country, or it may be that you might have a plaque or something on at your implementing partner's office in country. So really just spreading that and giving a little bit more context around that branding communication there. You will see in your agreement there is some more information around branding, and we of course, given that such a big goal of our program, we'll be touching on this more in February. It is really important to us. It's about using this opportunity to communicate your great work within your networks and wider as much as possible. We think about it as telling your story to the public, and you need to help, and we need your help in spreading that positive message of the great work that you are doing. If you have any questions on branding or communications, feel free to email us at friendshipgrants@dfat.gov.au. We will try and get back to you as soon as possible. We are a small team, so apologies we haven't come back directly to a couple of you. We've been trying to sort a couple of things out in terms of your agreements and also the webinar for today. So we will get back to you as soon as possible, but hopefully this gives you a very good sense of where to go. So obviously there is a little bit more information. I should just say in relation to branding communications, there's more information as well in the guidelines. So the application guidelines that were used to apply for this grant, there's some information in there around branding communications as well. So have a look at that. We'll make sure that we reiterate that. So we'll look at next steps. I'm sure many of you are thinking about this. So we have signed your agreements and we will return them to you as soon as possible. As you can appreciate, 46 agreements trying to return, as well as getting registrations and things for the webinar is quite a workload. So we are endeavouring to get that back to you by next week at the latest. At this stage, when we send that agreement to you, we will be asking for you to invoice us, but we'll be providing some further paperwork, so we will ask for that to be returned. All of that information will be outlined in the email back to you with your grant agreement, and if you have any further questions on that, you're more than welcome to get in touch. One of the biggest things that we need to consider is if you are a resident in Australia and you're going to travel overseas to visit or monitor your activities, it is a DFAT requirement that you register your travel plans and details on Smart Traveller. We will send a link that I'm hoping that most of you have seen or heard from Smart Traveller before, and that you do continue to register your Smart Traveller your details on Smart Traveller. This is not just the Australian government. This is not the Australian government wanting to know exactly what you're doing. It's also in times of when there is, unfortunately, a natural disaster or something happens, and we've got Australians on the ground. We provide that information. We provide a joined-up approach within the department to say that we do have people or implementing partners on the ground, but it also ensures your safety and security as well. So we can account for you as an Australian as a resident of Australia. Following on from that, when you are travelling to monitor your activities, we do strongly encourage you to engage with DFAT or the post, DFAT post. We also call them high commissions or embassies in the country that you're travelling to. When you are looking to travel to the country, please do get in touch with us at the Friendship Grants team, and we'll provide those linkages to the right people in DFAT in the country that you're visiting. And please provide as much notice as possible. I'm sure you can imagine that posts are also very busy, and they want to be able to try and prioritise as much as possible and ensure that they can meet you and your implementing partners. So I think this has been a few questions on the Friendship Grants briefing. So we do know that it will be held in Canberra, and that will be held in Barton. So if you're looking at your travel logistics, it will be held on the 6th and 7th of February in Barton. If you're looking at accommodation and would like to go somewhere close, that could be somewhere like Little National is close in Barton as well. There's quite a few places. We can send out some links of places close to where the Friendship Grants briefing will be held. As I said earlier, it will be 2 full days. We will anticipate we'll start around 8:30, 8:45 for registrations, and then starting the actual day by 9 o'clock, both days, and then looking to finish those around 5:30 on both days. Hopefully try and finish a little bit earlier on the 7th, but I can't guarantee, unfortunately, that that will be the case. So it is a great opportunity here to network on that briefing. We will be going into further detail in terms of these safeguards, but also the branding and the communications in terms of how to tell your story and how to tell the story, but also how to promote your activities. That's one of the things we'll be looking at. We are thinking that it would be kind of the implementers that would be coming to that briefing. However, we appreciate that some organisations are also quite small, and so it may be whoever's available on that time. And we will work with that as long as you can pass that information on to the relevant people in your organisation. As I said before, it is a great opportunity for you to network with each other, but also other people within the department. So we'll try and provide as much opportunity for you to meet the desk or the bilateral desk. So that being, for example, if you're operating in PNG, meeting the DFAT stakeholders that are working on the PNG program. Furthermore, we'll also, if you're working in health, we'll try and make sure that we have someone there from the thematic desk, so that is they work on health. And we want to try and, as much as possible, provide those linkages for you to where you're working in PNG and you're all working in health, seeing if you can make those linkages yourselves, but also gives you that opportunity to meet each other. We're really excited about it and meeting all of you in Canberra. I know that it's virtual reality at the moment meeting you, but we are looking forward to meeting people face to face. So just before we go, before we answer some of these questions, just to flag that the Friendship Grant Unit is always available to take your calls and emails during business hours. However, we do note that we will be down to a very skeleton staff over the Christmas and New Year period, but we'll be back ready to roll in 2019. So we will go to some questions now. I can see that there has been a few, and I do have Gus here with me who might also chirp in and answer some of them at the same time. So we're just going to check out what some of them were.
One of the first ones that we came up while you were talking, Kate, was about the social media specific hashtag post.
Yep. So definitely one of those that we can use is hashtag friendship grant or hashtag friendship grant. So more than happy for you to use that. When you're using Twitter, you can use @DFAT, and that will ensure that you're acknowledging DFAT, but also friendship grant if you're specifically referring to that, or Australian Aid is another one. We have got some of that information that we will pass on. We'll of course touch on it in the briefing, but we will send you on some information as well. That just gives you some of those quick tips in order to promote your activities now.
The next one is about will funds be provided before the end of this year?
Look, that's a great question, and we would love to say that, but again, we unfortunately can do what we can from our end, but it does need to go through to our financial policy team for them to process. It is with with aid funds that it is 30 days from a correctly rendered invoice. So when we receive a correctly rendered invoice, it will be paid to you within 30 days. We will try our best, but I don't anticipate, unfortunately, that the funds will be getting to you before the end of the financial year, but we'll try and get them to you as soon as possible.
Then we have a couple of budget-related questions. One's about about not accounting for expenses to come to the briefing, and then a kind of related one really with reallocating unused funds. Well, I guess in answer to the first one, I think we did try to be as clear as we could that that it was a mandatory requirement that organisations budget for the attendance of at least one person at the briefing. I don't know if we have much room to move within that, but that said, there is certainly flexibility within the budget itself in terms of how the monies are spent. And I guess we can talk about that further with individual organisations.
Yeah, more than happy to talk about that more within. You can look to move some of those costs, but we won't be able to go above what you have applied for within your grant agreement. We had limited funds available this year, and obviously it was a very competitive process, so there's lots of people that unfortunately have missed out as well. And similarly, just on that, is conscious of that there are caps to those administration costs, so it's 10% of the overall grant, and then it's also 10% monetary evaluation.
There was a specific question about the address in Barton. I guess it is primarily DFAT, but we may well be just outside of DFAT, but very adjacent to it as well in terms of location for the brief.
Yeah. So for those of you that aren't aware, DFAT's located at RG Casey building on John McEwen Crescent, but we also have a building that's on Sydney Avenue, so just across the road. Sorry, I've just also seen something in relation to what happens to the excess of unused funds. That's referred to in your grant agreement as well. We can definitely talk through that more and get some more advice from our Contracting and Aid Management Division.
There's a question there. Sorry.
Sorry, Ian, just in relation to your question around receiving funds before the end of the calendar year I was referring to, not the end of the financial year. It will definitely be with you before the end of the financial year. So that's those. So just in relation to starting your projects, given that you have attended this briefing, as long as you have attended this briefing and you have heard our expectations in relation specifically to the safeguarding, but also some of DFAT's priorities, as long as you address some of those concerns in terms of reviewing particularly the child protection and having a look at the, as Lindy said, the next steps, so reviewing your level of contact, but also, as Matthew said, having a look at the lists and things as we talked about in our application process, and then further having a look at the DFAT toolkit on fraud control. More than happy for you to actually start your activities from today. We have signed the agreements. We are just in the process of getting them back to you. So happy for you to start your agreements from today or when we finish this webinar, and we will send the agreements back to you in hopefully in the next couple of days or tomorrow or early next week. We'll do our very best to get it back to you ASAP. So the start date of the agreement is actually when it's signed or executed by both parties. So we've signed the agreement so you can actually start your activities. Okay, so I haven't seen any further questions come through. So in that regard, so we might look to wrap up. We'll keep an eye out on if anything further comes through there. So as we've seen from today, one of the key messages that you should take away from today is early identification and management of risks contributes to managing aid effectively. If you do have further questions, you should touch base with the Friendship Grants team, who can refer you on to the relevant people in the department if required or if we can't answer it. I do just see a couple of questions come through. You send the invoice to us. When we send back the agreement, we will be actually sending you some invoicing details. So following getting the agreement back, you'll be able to send your invoice to us then. We will be talking about reporting requirements in terms of under the Friendship Grant. So, but just touching on it briefly now, there is a midterm report that we anticipate will be due in July, I think is actually in your agreement, but also a final report that we've said, which we will amend in the agreement that comes back to you, but that will be the 20th of January 2020 that will be due. It is a requirement that the funds are spent within the 12-month period, and then we'll look to try and have a learning forum in potentially January or February next year. Not next year, sorry, apologies, in 2020. So now we can actually, then we can talk about the great work that you've done and we can look to go forward from there. So the case studies are actually in addition to the midterm and final reports. We will be sending information further on this. We will try and actually do so. There will be some further information that will be coming out on that. But we will also cover a lot of this information in the Friendship Grants briefing. It's helping you. We'll also then be able to promote your great work. We'll be able to put it on our DFAT website or put it out through our social media channels and acknowledge you and your organisation. We hope that will also give you a better promotion, but also extends those positive messages wider. So there were templates that are included they're still on the DFAT website of the midterm and the final reports as well. And yeah, thank you, Benjamin. We acknowledge, unfortunately, that was a typo on our part. We do apologise for that. We will amend it in the agreement that comes back out to you. We sent in the next steps email that in the clause specifically relating to reporting that it's unless in writing by DFAT, the January 2019 would be rather soon to be giving us a final activity report, given some of the activities will not start until early Feb. So it is 2020. will there be more MEL advice prior to the boot camp? Is it monitoring, evaluation and learning advice? There is a template currently also on our website around monitoring and evaluation. And of course, we want to make sure that it's in line with the DFAT requirements. Yes, we'll endeavour to provide as much information as we can prior to the boot camp. Or we are changing it to Friendship Grants Briefing, but we do have a tendency to refer to it as boot camp. We'll just keep an eye on that if there's any other things that come through. So a reminder that this webinar, again, has been recorded, and we will be sending a link to when it is published to you next week, hopefully. And we'll also send, as I said, throughout various parts of the presentation, we'll be sending you documents or links to resources that may help you before or to start your activities. We really do look forward to starting your activities and hearing the good news. And we can definitely send the links to the reporting templates prior to Feb. More than happy to do that. We do look forward to the good news stories. And if you'd like to send through case studies and things, feel free to do so. Thanks again to our presenters today and to ACFED for hosting the webinar. We do really appreciate it and hope that you did also. Peter, just touched on that earlier. In terms of funding, it is 30 days after receipt of a correctly rendered invoice, but we'll do our best to get that as quick as possible. We do wish you all very happy holidays, and thank you again for attending today. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to give us a call or send us an email. Thank you. Happy holidays.